Hello, BookTube. I've lost a little momentum on a feature that I wanted to do on this channel in 2020, a thing I've been calling a TBR TBR, where I look back at book hauls that I've done on this channel over the last 4 years and give you my follow-up opinions on all of the books, as opposed to hot take first impressions, which was very enjoyable for you and very enjoyable for me, but it doesn't tell you much when you're hunting it for encountering a book in a bookstore. And the reason that I've lost momentum is a reason that I should have seen coming a mile off, which is that most books are forgettable. Most of them are. The hot enthusiasm of the moment, in the spotlight of the season, I might talk about them more than they deserve, but after a settled amount of time, we're talking about videos now that are 4 years old. Most of them don't stand out. And every time I would assemble a list of those titles, I would think, well, there's not much here to talk about. And I want to regain that momentum, so I'm going to do a kind of catch-up video. I've got the rad pad here. I'm going to do a kind of catch-up video in a slightly different way than I've done these TBR TBRs in 2020 so far. I'm going to go through a long list of books to catch up to where I want to be. But I'm not going to discuss every one of them at length. Most of them are forgettable. I will list the book, I will list the author down below, because I'm perfectly willing to admit that some of you will find these books better than I found them. Right? That's just the nature of being individuals. Some of you will get a lot more out of these things than I did or ever would. So I'll remind you of them, just so you don't have to go prowling through 3,000 videos. But I'm going to expand on only a handful of them for this video, and then I'll expand more in subsequent videos. So we're just going to go down a list here fairly quickly. I'm hoping to get this video done in 5 minutes. How to Survive a Plague is the first book by David France, and it's about AIDS, and it's very good. It's a worthy addition to an AIDS library. Carousel Court is the next one by Joe McGinnis. It's fairly solid, but not memorable at all. I Shot the Buddha by Colin Cotterill is likewise solid, but not memorable. Someone to Love by Mary Balogh. I'm a big fan of Mary Balogh, but this book was limp, a little bit empty. Didn't have any of her usual emotional payoffs either for me. Then we have The Kingdom by Fuminori Nakamura. I didn't enjoy it much at all. It's a crime thriller that doesn't really hold its weight. Then we have The Presidents and UFOs by Larry Holcombe, a nonfiction work about the speculation that has surrounded U.S. presidents connected with the subject of unidentified flying objects. And although the subject is a lot of fun, and although Holcombe I don't think is going to write any kind of great epic on the subject, the book is still relatively make-weight. I mean, a quick Google search of the subject will get you 90% of the book. And if that's okay, that's perfectly okay if an author's going to do that. But if an author's going to do that, they have to make up the difference by being an amazing prose stylist or having tons of amazing insights. And those were thin on the ground. Then we have The Big Book of Science Fiction, edited by the VanderMeers, which you've seen on this channel and which is actually here in this room somewhere. Big 1,000-page thing, double columns, an anthology of science fiction plucked from many different countries, many different decades. And the next book is also a big book. It's The Big Book of Jack the Ripper, edited by the legendary Otto Penzler, which is lots and lots of ripperology, contemporaneous police records, later theories, proponents of who done it, some more outlandish theorizing. Very good, again, like How to Survive a Plague, a necessary addition to a ripperology bookshelf, if you happen to have one. Then Homesick for Another World by Ottessa Moshfegh, wretched. They're Playing Our Song by Carole Sager, fairly forgettable. The Girl from Venice by Martin Cruz Smith. Martin Cruz Smith, for me, can often be relied on to turn in an above-average thriller. And of course I was drawn to this one because it's partially set in Venice, which is all you'll usually need to hook me into a piece of fiction of any kind. But he was off his game in this book. It's exactly what I'm talking about. These videos, the way they looked when I was making preliminary lists of books looked like I would just be running down a list of things saying, not good, not good, not good, which makes sense. That is an accurate reflection of the U.S. publishing season. So, but nevertheless, a little bit depressing as video content. Then we have Blue Moon by Wendi, Corsi, Staub, forgettable. We have The Stars Askew by Rjurik, Davidson, science fiction that is fairly textured, fairly well done, probably worth your, I don't have no idea if it's out in paperback, probably worth your time to find it, though. You would probably like it. Red Right Hand by Levi Black. Not particularly good, very high energy, but dumb as a bag of hammers. I think I wrote a review of it, but I think I probably wrote a review of some of these things. So, and then we have Pound for Pound by Shannon Kopp, which is very moving for me, a nonfiction work about her work with animal shelters and how that has saved her life. A very familiar thing. At least 3 or 4 times every book season, you will get a book about the stray or the shelter dog who rescued me. That has become a very familiar cliche. It was effectively done. If you don't want to miss any books on a subject like that, any books about saving dogs, then you don't want to miss this one. Then Our Number's Real by Brian Clegg. I imagine a lot of it went over my head. I went into it hoping that they aren't. but even so, a lot of math and science books, 99 Proofs of a Theorem, for instance, or Spooky Action at a Distance, or a bunch of other things. A great deal of math and subatomic physics books, for instance, also go over my head, but stay in my memory because they're better done than this. So I'm not sure that excuses it. Then we have Valiant Gentleman by Sabina Murray, a historical novel about Roger Casement that was kind of bland. We have a biography of Karl Marx by Gareth Stedman Jones that I thought was fairly well done. I think I need a reread of it. I think at the time that I read it, I was a little monstered out, and Marx sort of fell under a shadow of a whole bunch of people. I think, in other words, that some of the recent biographies that I read back in 2016 when I read it colored it for me in a way that probably, if I were to find it again at a used bookstore, or if I were to find a paperback copy, I would probably like it a lot more. I seem to remember it's written with a great deal of spirit. Then 7 Skeletons by Lydia Pine, forgettable. Children of the New World by Alexander Weinstein, forgettable. Reaper's Fire by Joanna Wild, steamy biker supernatural romance novel that was largely forgettable. Dark Carousel by Christine Feehan, a romance author, a steamy contemporary romance author who usually works for me. This one didn't do anything for me. The Dragon Round by Stephen Power. I thought it had lots of promise. It's a fantasy novel. I thought it had lots of promise and a couple of really well done scenes that unusually for genre novels came at the end of the book, not at the beginning. Usually the really polished scenes are right at the beginning, and the thing is just not allowed to quietly wander off like a senility patient. But this one had some powerhouse scenes at the end. Not sure that that counts as a recommendation. I mean, your reading time is very, very precious, but still. Then Future Humans by Scott Solomon, meditation on human evolution and on the rise of augmented humans that was boring, and that's not a subject that should be boring, so I can't recommend it. The Explosion Chronicles by Jan Lianki, translated by Carlos Rojas. This is a Chinese fiction superstar in China, and The Explosion Chronicles, for me, like a lot of other people, was the introduction to this author, and even in English translation I saw what the fuss was about. I quite like The Explosion Chronicles. Then The Vanquished by Robert Gerwath, a very brainy study of basically post-traumatic stress disorder and also the toll that war takes on even civilian populations. A difficult book to classify. I loved it. I reviewed it, I think. I reviewed it. I don't remember where I reviewed it. It could have been almost anywhere. But if you find it in paperback, first of all, I've never seen it in paperback. I don't know if I'm blurbed on it. But it's worth your time to read if you're interested in military history. Then The Field of the Cloth of Gold by Magnus Mill. This is a longer than it should have been, historical work about a weirdly anticlimactic and odd meeting between King Henry VIII and the King of France that was full of psychological drama if you believe the first-hand reports, but you shouldn't. You shouldn't believe them uncritically, and even so, it doesn't. It's just one diplomatic incident. Rare to have 2 kings show up and make essentially a temporary city in which to meet, but not ultimately worth a whole book. Then Naming Thy Name by Elaine Scarry. This was fairly good, but I love this author, and I've certainly known her to do much better work. Biography by Philippe Girard of Toussaint Louverture. I have read a couple of other biographies of this figure. This one doesn't stand out. A Stone's Throw, Memoir of a Dope Fiend by Scott Spackey. Had some visceral moments, as drug addiction memoirs almost always will. It's kind of a low bar. But this one didn't soar the way the best of them do. So I don't know if that's just a question of Spackey's literary ability or what. But then we have Wild Sex by Karen Bondar, which is as a kind of a grade school titillation factor about sex in the natural world, but it's not interesting enough to bear it out. I've read natural history writers, nature writers who could do this much, much better. And that sort of kills the recommendation factor of the book. And that's it. It's a very long list. I'm going to hope that this gives me a little momentum to dig deeper into the list that will follow. I don't know how I'm going to manage that. I don't know quite how I'm going to navigate the fact that a lot of the books that I got in the mail in the last 4 years are forgettable. And they aren't worth talking about. They aren't worth selling or selling to you on their merits or even discouraging you. They will sink below the radar. That's book writers, authors have said for millennia that is the natural fate of writing and their greatest fear. Every writer wants their book to be noticed. That's the main thing they want, even if the notice is bad. Nothing's worse than indifference. We read that in Trollope. And this proves that out, because 90% of the books on this list I would react to with indifference. I wouldn't even raise my hand to pull them off a shelf at a used bookstore to examine them just for old time's sake. I just wouldn't do it. There are hundreds of thousands of new books. So what's left is for me to pick out the winners here. I've already mentioned How to Survive a Plague is well worth your time to read, but also the two big books. The Big Book of Science Fiction and the Big Book of Jack the Ripper. The big book series by Vintage are always worth getting. They always are. There's an enormous amount of love and care, and often a great deal of editorial discretion, especially when you're dealing with Otto Penzler. A great deal of editorial discretion that really pays off. These are perfect examples of anthologies that have their own view of the world, anthologies that rise above the sum of their parts. So I would strongly recommend them as well if you were to ever see a big book like this, like these two, Jack the Ripper or science fiction, and you're the least bit interested in the subject. If you see one of these books at a used bookstore, grab it. Because no matter what you're paying for it, you're getting more out of it. Even new in a bookstore, in a retail bookstore, if you can find one that's open, even new, these things are a steal for even the inflated retail price. You're still getting much more than you're paying. So I'd put those on the recommend list as well. But next time, we will do fewer books and dig into them in greater detail, I hope. I hope. It's either that or I just continue this way, where I list the books so that you at least have a list in front of you, but I only really talk about the ones that I do recommend after all this time, which would be much closer to the process of all of us walking up and down the aisles of a retail bookstore. If I was with you and I said, okay, yeah, it's 10 shelves of stuff, but this right here, don't miss this. That might be the equivalent of that. We shall see. I'll do another one of these. I'll mull on it over the weekend. I'll do another one of these next week, and we'll see what form it takes. So in the meantime, I'm going to wrap this up, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.